Hello guys, and we're back. And for today's discussion, we're going to do some bit of a different approach and showing a typical deck tech. And this one for the standard, we're not only going to discuss the kind of strategy this deck would imply. For example, this one for this feature, we have Gruul Aggro, but we'll also delve into the sideboard plan and how it would fare enough on these other decks. As you can see on the side, the rest of the top 8 finishers in the MTGO League Standard that was done yesterday. I think this is 12/29 year 2023, and so we're going to check on what this deck would have, or let's say a kind of a deck strategy this would imply in the aggro category. So this is just a Gruul Aggro, as they say, but it's more of like an artifact based deck with a lot of these creatures that goes with benefiting, adding +++ counters, and having also with the Oscillate, the Shattered Spire, as to gain more of these counters. So we're going to start with the 17 creatures here. You can see the 1-drop is 4 copies of Ginger Brute and a Haywire Might. So Ginger Brute is not only become a 1/1 with haste, but also the option here that you can just pay 1 to have this one cannot be blocked this turn except by creatures with haste, and also can be sacrificed to gain 3 life. Now with that setup, I think the other 1-drop that could benefit from it is this one, the 4 copies of Teething Wormlet. So this is a 1-cost 1/1, but as long as an artifact enters the battlefield, you will gain 1 life, and then if it's the first time this ability is resolved, you will put a ++ counter on Wormlet. So as long as any artifact enters the battlefield under your control, for the first time it would trigger of this ability, you would put up a counter, so it goes bigger and bigger. At the same time, if you have this Death Touch ability, as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. Now for that setup, you can basically curve out with Teething Wormlet into Ginger Brute, and to later on these 2 drops of a Patchwork Automaton. This is just a 1/1 for 2 colorless or any color mana, but whenever you cast an artifact spell, you place a ++ counter on Patchwork Automaton. So with that option, you also have this legendary Food Knight creature, Seer Danger, the Mill Enter. We have 4 copies of that in the deck. So it has this ability that goes to have Trample, Hexproof, in haste as long as an opponent controls a Planeswalker. So whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a ++ counter on Seer Danger and Scry 1. And at the same time, you can also sacrifice this one to gain life equal to its power. But more observe this ability, this important ability that placing cards in graveyard from the battlefield of the artifacts gets to have this one pump, are these copies of these non-creature artifacts. That is Experimental Synthesizer, that gets you to have this ability to extra tap card library, and then you may play at that turn, and also triggers when it leaves the battlefield. So any other sacrifice effects wherein you can also use this one to sacrifice it. You can also create a 2/2 white Samurai creature token with Vigilance. Now for the other artifact that also gets you the advantage that can also be sacrificed to pump up Seer Ginger is the copy of Mishra's Research Dex. So when it enters the battlefield, not only ability, but when you pay 1 to sacrifice it, exile up 2 cards of library and then choose one of them, and then until the end of your next turn you may play that card. And also it has the option also that can be unearthed for 1 mana and 1 red mana, for that's basically 2 unearthed cost. So that with a copy of that, you can have this combo-ish effect that can also gets you to go with the card advantage. Other than that, you can also have these cards that can goes with more of your artifacts that can be sacrificed. So we have 4 copies of Voltage Surge. This can be sacrificed to deal 4 damage instead of the usual 2 damage. And then we have Touch the Tower, wherein you can deal 2 damage to a creature or Planeswalker. Then if it's bargain, bargain is you can sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token. It will deal 3 damage to the permanent and scry 1. So the only benefit is that you can have the permanent exiled instead of it's going to the graveyard. And so with that effect, you can basically have more of this card advantage. And at the same time, if you have also let the Shattered Spire in play, it has its ability that if one or more counters would put in an artifact or creature you control, put that many plus one counters +1 on it instead. So that only with also the instance of you, if you need to activate this, you just pay to tap, put up some counter the creature, artifact you control, and activate only as a sorcery. So that in a way you can have basically a lot of options here in putting +1 counters and also gaining card advantage and board advantage out of it. Now for your lands, it's basically a lot of fix here. You can see here we have Bisuju, Caproline Gorge, Carpus and Forest for the mana fix. And the only addition is that we have 4 Mirex in the deck to make sure that those Protection Might artifact creatures can also serve as trigger for the Teething Wormlet ability and can also be used to sacrifice for these kinds of spot removals. And of course, don't forget also some basic mountains and forests included in the 22 lands update on the deck. And for the sideboard, you can see here we have a lot of utility. So how do this Haywire might 1 copy in the main deck and 3 more copies in the sideboard would be useful for any of this setup. You can basically have this one not only as a 1/1 for 1, but also as a exile for target non-creature artifact or non-creature enchantment. So good targets here would be that of for example, for Esper, we have the wedding announcements as our main good target, and also for the domain control setup are copies of Leyline's Binding, and later on we have also enchantments that can serve as a removal. Particularly this one, Temporary Lockdown, can also be used as a good target for the Haywire Might ability. So that with that setup, you need also to have this one included if you'd really be able to expect this kind of matchup or sideboard enchantments and artifacts that we going to go against in your game 2 and game 3 of your match. And for additional sideboard options, we have a copy of Litomantic Barrage. This can go with targeting let's say the target's blue or white. So more of those targeted creature planeswalker would be dealt 5 damage instead. The only drawback is that it can't be cast at instant speed, but it makes sure that it will dissolve because of the spell can't be countered ability. And also 4 copies of Rebel Salvo. This would also go with affinity for equipment, so it's not really seeing here that we have equipment cards, but basically this is just an instant 3 damage, 3 mana cost, 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker. So that any target would be that of the Sholdred, for example, or any relevant planeswalkers that you can see here. Let's say with the hidden, let's say we have also some Virtue. Some good targets will also be Rafin, since Rafin would be having 4 toughness, so we need 5 damage out of it. Otherwise, you can also have good targets. Let's say for the 5 color control, the domain control again, we can check on the Wandering Emperor as a good target for that, and also Nisa Ascended Animist, since we have high loyalty counters that can be used to have him generate more of the board advantage in the form of elementals. So that also is your good addition here. So for the sideboard setup for this card, you can basically cut out maybe Voltage Surge if he's I think Torso Tower is the best sideboard out, since Voltage Surge can also deal 4 damage to a planeswalker. So combining a lot of huge damage spells would be very efficient for that kind of setup. And of course, boarding out the inefficient cards such as Torso Tower, since matchups with the 5 color control are not really that effective with that card. So other options here, Pitting Needle for planeswalkers. Basically, if you have other planeswalker 1-off targets, you can use this one to name this card, and those activations could not be activated unless they are mana abilities. And 4 copies of Soul Guide Lantern. So this would also goes with exiling cards from graveyards, but in this setup, I'm not pretty sure how this would become effective. Let's say, seeing in the metagame, we have only a few cards that goes with benefiting from graveyards. Maybe the mere Aggro would be your best sideboarded setup, but I don't really see any relevant here that you'd need to go with the Soul Guide Lantern to sideboard in against that deck. But anyhow, any unusual deck matchup that relies on graveyards would be the best sideboard against this kind of deck. So you can also use this one to exile whole of your opponent's graveyard, and if needed, you can just pay 1 tap, sacrifice it to draw a card. But also this goes, since this is an artifact, it also goes to trigger both your Patchwork Automaton, your Tinting Wormlet, and other cards here that would also benefit from having you to cast an artifact spell or artifact card entering the battlefield. So additional support here are just the copies of Real Treatment, since it would also protect your creature. It gets them to gain hexproof, and also creating a roll token attached to it. So it gets also Summon and has Ward 1. So also a good benefit in protecting your best creature, for example. But as you can see here, there are a lot of options, your creatures that would need to have protection depending on how the board set up or your opponent would set up against this one. So overall, I think this deck would be really a good way to have an aggro artifact based deck in the current standard. The strategy might be really, let's say, not in par with that of the new cards from Lost Covers of Ixalan, but even though I'm not really seeing this one as a good way to set up this kind of Gruul aggro deck, since there are other also Gruul decks that goes with pumping or just relying this one. For example, these are the Audacity aggro Monstrous Rage Giant Grow setup, which is also faster than that setup, but typically I would prefer this one as a more of a resilient because of the huge card advantage you can provide, and can also be effective in the mid game up to the late game. So last but not the least, the visual view of this list, you can see here. Okay, so there are a lot of red and green. I think the color combination here would be really the same or balanced, because of there are also some more of the artifact cards which would not really have any color to needed to be cast in this kind of deck. So I guess that's it. If you've liked this video, just click like and subscribe, and we can also have a similar short discussion of how the sideboard would work with comparison for the other top 8 cards in this kind of video feature, and also a deck tech kind of blog. Again guys, thank you for checking this one. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you on the next video.